First, I want to introduce our speaker. I'm so glad that Gloria Norris has agreed and volunteered to do this. And I have a little introduction. Gloria Norris has traveled an interesting path from Elmwood to Hollywood over the years. The Elmwood is Manchester's Elmwood Gardens, where she lived during the 60s with her parents, Jimmy and Shirley Norris. She had an interesting family life, to be sure, so that her story now is the best-selling book, her memoir, Kookooland. Kookooland was first published in January 2016, and the housing project where she grew up is still located on the south end of Elm Street in Manchester. It was a place, if you grew up there was definitely a stigma attached to growing up in Elmwood Gardens. And in some ways, her father, Jimmy, helped add to that with his combination of illicit pursuits that he ran out of the apartment, doing everything from selling stolen televisions, porn movies, and eventually drugs. Gloria's book, Kookooland, has been described as, and aptly so, as a memoir written on the edge of a knife blade. So I would like to have a round of applause as I introduce my friend, Gloria Norris.
That is the most incredible introduction I've ever had, maybe anyone's ever had. I mean, whoa, this is your life. So it is great to be here. I'm glad there's such a big group. When I saw the snow today, I thought, this is New Hampshire though, you guys are hardy. In Kookooland, if there's a drop of rain, nobody shows up, heaven forbid, you should plan a party and, there's a couple of drops of rain, no one will show up. So thanks for coming, braving the elements. And like I said, Nancy, wow, where are you, Nancy? There you are, darling. Thank you for inviting me to speak at this fantastic event. I'm honored to be a part of any organization that has you at the helm. Thank you for fighting this fight to keep the news strong and vibrant in this beautiful state that we all love so very much. Your energy and dedication truly, truly inspire me. Your work has the power and the potential to create ripples of change in this all-important swing state, ripples that can become waves across this country. So this amazing woman over there, Nancy, she told you, we first connected when I was researching Kookooland, a true crime memoir about the Piasny family murders in the 60s and 70s. My family had known the Piasnys, and this story, it had haunted me for years. I'd been a screenwriter and filmmaker for my entire professional career, often working on crime-related films. I just seemed to be writing about murderers all the time. So writing this book was both familiar territory and a new frontier, since I had never written a book before, only screenplays. The thing is, when I first conceived of the book, I never pictured it being predominantly narrated by my 9-year-old self. I never even really imagined it as a memoir. What I pictured was a serious work of literary investigative journalism. The title of the book back then was Blood Sisters, not Kookooland. Tonally, those two titles are about like night and day. The outrageous humor that's in the book, that was definitely not part of what I had imagined. Writing a book or often covering a news story is a long, circuitous journey, and honestly, you never know where you're going to end up. So in the early days of this journey, while I was still doing my research, I made countless trips back here to Manchester. I spent hours at the library scrolling through rolls of microfilm until I was literally nauseous. I tracked down a retired policeman who hung up on me after trying to shake me down for money. Folks in the prison system stonewalled me. Piasny family relatives screamed at me and ordered me off of their property. Basically, I was experiencing a day in the life of the average reporter. Frustrating, sometimes nauseating, sometimes downright scary. What a blast, what fun, what a damn hard job.
Yeah.
Now, during this time, there is a book that I often look to for inspiration. Some of you may know it, Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. The way that book showed a horrific crime in rural Kansas, and in the process, revealed some disturbing truths about Middle America. That's the template I wanted Kookooland to follow. I wanted it to be a window into a notorious New Hampshire crime at a tumultuous moment in our history, 1963, the year of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, and Betty Friedan's groundbreaking feminist book, The Feminine Mystique, and of course, the Kennedy assassination. That was quite a year, 1963. I wanted the story to be a window into injustice, specifically gender-based injustice, far beyond these particular crimes themselves. We've all heard the term honor killing describing crimes in places like Pakistan or Afghanistan, where men, enabled by patriarchal societies and patriarchal courts, murder their wives, daughters, and sisters if they believe that the family honor has been sullied by these women. Well, to me, this story, the Piasny story, was like an American honor killing. Hank Piasny, enabled by his well-paid legal and medical defenders, manipulated New Hampshire's not guilty by reason of insanity defense to let a man essentially walk free for 2 brutal murders. The victims were Hank's ex-wife Doris, stabbed 11 times, and architect John Bentley, the man she happened to be keeping company with that night, stabbed 13 times. 2 brutal, lying in wait, classic domestic violence murders, the culmination of years of well-documented abuse that Hank had subjected Doris to when she was his wife. Well documented because unlike most women back then, unlike many women still today, unlike my mother Shirley, who was similarly abused by Hank's buddy, my dad Jimmy, Doris Piasny, she called the cops on her batterer husband. She called the cops on Hank relentlessly. She got restraining orders. She turned to the criminal justice system again and again for help. But the system abandoned her. The authorities didn't punish Hank during the years she was being abused as his wife, and after she divorced him and was dead, they didn't punish him for her murder. This was a travesty. There was no justice under the law for Doris, only injustice. And injustice for poor Mr. Bentley, who was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Injustice for his grieving family. When I was combing through documents in the court archives in Nashua, I came across a wrenching handwritten letter that one of Bentley's 4 sisters, Emlyn, had sent to the judge overseeing the case. This is a copy of that letter, dated December 15th, 1966. and I'd like to read you a little of this letter. Dear Judge Morris, yesterday, along with the sorrow of attending the 3rd anniversary Mass for the repose of the soul of my brother, John D. Bentley, our silent agony had the added pain of knowing that John's murderer is now a free man. Your decision to release a man who attacked my brother with such hellish intent was not a surprise. As I received the callers at the funeral parlor, rumors of a gradual release were circulating. I have labored under the burden of trying to conceal from my parents the possibility of a killer's release. My father and mother are old people. Their grief over their boy will end only when the final curtain falls. All of you who so carefully plotted in 1963 to free from penalty a murderer have added mockery to our grief and covered your souls with John's innocent blood. To you and all who were too weak to stand up to a bully, and she had that right, Hank was a bully, and who sanctioned the release of such an evil person, I wish you a long, long life. Only then, when your youth and your power decline, will you see yourself in the image of what you have become. I seal my tears and my bitter sorrow in this letter to you, John Bentley's sister. Well, whenever I felt like abandoning this project for a myriad of reasons, including I wasn't being paid, I was spending my own money, didn't have a publishing deal, never knew if it would see the light of day. This letter was one of the things that kept me going. This woman's protest against an injustice in this city had gone nowhere. Her words were stuffed into a dusty old folder. Just like Doris, she was silenced. Like my mother, she was silenced. Like me as a child, silenced. And that's a big part of why I did end up telling the story in my 9-year-old voice, after all. I wanted to give all of us a voice. I wanted to do what Emlyn Bentley couldn't do, convict the people who perpetrated this injustice, at least in the court of public opinion. Call out those people. So let me do a little of that right now. There were many individuals who contributed to this injustice, but there's one I would like to give a special shout out to. A man by the name of Dr. Harry Kozel. Dr. Kozel was Hank's most influential defender, a big shot Boston psychiatrist who got a big laudatory obit in the New York Times when he died at the ripe old age of 102. Kozel was famous because he was also an expert consultant on the Boston Strangler case, and more importantly, on the Patty Hearst kidnapping case. This guy's opinion carried incredible weight. He spent several hours examining Hank, handsomely paid for by Hank's family. Injustice doesn't come cheap. And then he testified unequivocally that Hank was completely insane when he committed those murders. He diagnosed Hank as a paranoid schizophrenic. He said Hank had zero recollection of the murders. He had blacked out and blocked out everything. Now, Hank, he was a monumental drinker. So I can believe he was pretty hammered and a bit fuzzy on the details of that night. However, if drinking were an all-purpose, get-out-of-free-jail card, hardly any domestic abusers would be paying for their crimes. Alcohol is a well-documented component of many domestic violence incidents. But Kozel didn't blame the alcohol. He said Hank had a bona fide mental illness and shouldn't be held responsible for these crimes. Well, actually, I shouldn't really say crimes, plural, because the Superior Court jury of 21 men and one measly woman didn't end up ruling on both of Hank's murders. They never even considered Doris's murder. It was put aside. They only ruled on John Bentley's murder. And for that, the murder of Emmeline Bentley's brother, they accepted Kozel's diagnosis and found Hank insane. In death, as in life, Doris's life just didn't matter. So why were all these men so damn eager to let Hank off the hook? First and foremost, we can never underestimate the power of status when it comes to criminal justice. Hank was a big kahuna in our little city. A lot of the businessmen and judges who hunted with him, the cops who bought their handcuffs at his sporting goods shop, who even worked for him occasionally to pick up some extra dough. They didn't want to see their buddy behind bars. Dr. Kozel gave them cover for doing what they in their hearts wanted to do all along. Let him off. And so they did. Hank got shipped off to the state hospital for life and until he was deemed to be sane again. At the hospital, Hank didn't exactly behave like a paranoid schizophrenic. He wasn't raving or delusional. He played golf. He hired other patients to wait on him. He entertained a gazillion visitors. So many, they had to institute a new system of making appointments for people to visit him. Like I said, Hank had status. He even got plastered, drank highballs with my dad. I was there for that. He told Jimmy, "All my troubles are 6 feet under." He knew what he was doing. He knew what he had done. And after only 2 years, at his earliest possible eligibility, he petitioned the court to be set free. Of course, his old pal, Dr. Kozel, came back to testify. And what do you know? He now said Hank was perfectly sane. In fact, he said the only thing that had been making Hank insane back then was his wife. His awful, awful wife. "I doubt very many men could stand this so long," he said. That's a quote. That's what he testified. So basically, now that Hank's ex-wife was gone, Hank was good to go. He is now unlikely to commit any assault on any man or woman, Kozel insisted. Never mind Hank's well-documented temper, or his history of violence, or the fact that his nose had been broken 7 times for getting into fights. You know that old saying, as clear as the nose on your face? Well, it was literally true in Hank's case. Hank's nose looked like a... Ooh. I hope that Hank, the spirit of Hank, he doesn't like what I'm saying. Hank's nose, this nose of his, the nose on his face, looked like a boxer's nose. Proof positive that this guy loved to fight. But no, never mind that nose. Broken from brawling, beat red from drinking, blame his ex-wife, the woman who had divorced him 6 months earlier, the woman who wasn't even living with him, the woman who was in fact in the process of moving out to California, AKA Kookooland, to get as far away from this monster as possible. She was driving him nuts. She made him violent. The violence perpetrated against her was her fault. And that, to this day, constitutes the defense for a lot of gender-based crime. She made him do it. She was wearing that short dress. She was out jogging alone. She went to her boss's hotel room when he summoned her for a meeting. Hey, what did she think would happen? And God forbid, she was drinking. drink a few too many beers while female, and you might as well be wearing a neon sign that says, "Go right ahead." A woman drinks, she's automatically guilty. A man drinks, he's automatically exonerated. So the judge, he accepted Kozel's argument that Hank was temporarily insane, ex-wife insane. He was released with barely any follow-up treatment. He celebrated by getting hammered with my father. Over the ensuing weeks, some men in Manchester actually commended him for killing John Bentley. Bentley, they felt, was a handsome playboy, and they didn't want him playing around with their wives. John Bentley did not deserve to die for being handsome, and Doris Piasny didn't deserve to die for being free. They were both innocent victims of Hank's rage, just like Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman were victims of O.J. Simpson's rage. O.J. Simpson, there's another man who got away with murder. There's another more famous American honor killing. We have an epidemic of them in this country. And as for Dr. Kozel, well, I think he got away with murder too. He got that big glowing obit in the illustrious New York Times. I really wish they had written something more nuanced about him, because even within the obit that they did publish, there were intimations that Kozel's bias against women was not just a one-time deal, not just confined to the Piasny case. When Kozel testified in the Patty Hearst case at the request of the Justice Department, he apparently didn't cut her any slack, like he had for Hank, of course. No extenuating circumstances for Patty Hearst. Patty Hearst was kidnapped, imprisoned in a closet for weeks, and raped repeatedly. But Kozel did not think those traumas should gain her any leniency whatsoever. The way he saw it, she was a rich, spoiled, willful young woman, and what she endured shouldn't have any bearing on her culpability in the bank robbery that she participated in with her captors. He said prior to her abduction, she had been, quote, a rebel in search of a cause. I tell you, there's nothing more dangerous than a rebellious woman. Hank's wife was one. Patty Hearst, apparently, was another. She received a sentence of 35 years, and Kozel's testimony was a big part of why she got that harsh sentence, and she blamed him for it. Fortunately, President Jimmy Carter commuted it after 2 years. But right, talk about a double standard? I mean, come on. The New York Times could have and should have taken a harder look at this famous doctor's misogyny, because I feel he was a misogynist. If this obit were written today, I think they would have. Post Me Too, you couldn't not address it. We're in a different world today. Fortunately, I think we are. And fortunately, the New York Times has been trying to rectify some issues with their obituaries. Last year, they began a project called Overlooked. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, pretty great. They've been publishing obituaries of important people, women, whose deaths went unacknowledged by them over the many years that they predominantly featured obits of white men. So Ida B. Wells, Sylvia Plath, Charlotte Bronte are three of the writers who finally got much deserved obits. Can you believe they didn't get them at the time? I applaud the New York Times for doing this. I applaud the press when they acknowledge their own mistakes and shortcomings. That's more than you can say for most of our politicians, or for all those men brought down by the Me Too movement who invariably insist they were having consensual experiences with their victims. Like, for example, making some poor woman watch them masturbate into a potted plant. That's a universal turn on, right, for us women? Come on. So I commend the New York Times for taking another look at the past from the vantage point of the present, for doing what good journalists strive to do, give us the truest, fairest picture of us and our world, past, present, and future. It's not always possible to see the truth right as it's happening. Journalists are human beings, fallible human beings like the rest of us, living in the time and place they live in, reflecting the attitudes and unavoidably the biases of those times. But the big difference with journalists, and why, to me, they are our saviors, and I say that without hyperbole, is that they are often the people who are first to question those attitudes and biases. The first ones to smell a rat. The ones who push us to evolve, to become better people, who, much more than our politicians, lead us to creating a more perfect union. Journalists hold a mirror up to all of us and make us confront if we really like what we see. I honestly don't know where we'd be without the press. Maybe we'd still be in Vietnam, for God's sakes. And in my industry, the film industry, Hollywood molester Harvey Weinstein would probably be collecting his honorary Oscar this February. And Jeffrey Epstein would have a snazzy phallic-shaped science building erected at Harvard with his name on it. Right? The Miami Herald journalist, Julie K. Brown, who conducted the investigation into Epstein's crimes, which led to his downfall, is a gender justice hero to me. She is proof positive that a local journalist following a local story can have a monumental impact. That Epstein story was built from the foundation of it being a local Florida story. Epstein had a mansion there, he abused girls there, and he served his minimal slap on the wrist time in jail there. When Julie Brown began her multi-year investigation of this predator, most people thought she was wasting her time beating a dead horse. This was old news, Jeffrey Epstein. This guy had served his time, and there was really no indication he was still out there attacking children in Miami or anywhere else. But Julie Brown smelled a rat. She had a nose for news. And luckily, Julie's nose, her reporter's instinct, zeroed in on Epstein and didn't stop sniffing around. Over months, she crisscrossed the country, encouraging women to tell their stories of abuse. Often she paid her own expenses, doubling up in hotel rooms with another woman journalist who was assisting her. She did this to follow a story that pretty much no one except her editor thought was worth pursuing. But we now know she was right. There are countless girls out there who have been saved from from being molested by Jeffrey Epstein because of the work of this one journalist. Law enforcement didn't make this happen. The justice system didn't make this happen. A journalist made this happen. Journalists make things happen. They are change makers. That's why we need to support them. First off, with our voices, loud and clear and unequivocal, defend them to our last breath against the baseless, vile charges of fake news. And secondly, support them with our cash. This vital, painstaking work takes time and it takes money. Our money. We gotta pay for this, folks. My husband and I, we subscribe to 4 newspapers: New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, and the Boston Globe. We also subscribe to magazines and support online news organizations, including this incredible one, In Depth and Age. We're not wealthy people. You know, I'm a frugal New Englander, like most of you. I don't, spend money willy-nilly. But we consider these subscriptions an absolute necessity, a crucial, crucial investment in our democracy. It's so easy for us to take the news for granted. It's always been there in our lifetimes, so we expect that it will always be there. Well, we act on that expectation at our peril. We give into that complacency at our peril. If we don't want to end up living in some version of Russia or China or Margaret Atwood's Gilead, where state news controls all the information and thereby controls us, we've got to step up, all of us. We've got to give till it hurts, because the discomfort of spending a little money now saves us from living in a world of hurt, a world where Hank Piasny hurts his wife and gets away with it, and Jeffrey Epstein hurts children and gets away with it, and businessmen and politicians hurt our communities and our environment and get away with it. A world where people get away with murder. I don't want to live in that world. Do you? I support the news so people don't get away with murder. So the truth finally comes out, even if it takes decades. So join me in this. Save our democracy. Give till it hurts. Go Nancy. We have your back.
Woo-hoo!